Всім добрий вечір.
On behalf of the brave.
On behalf of every father and every mother
Who waits for freedom. On behalf
of our warriors and paves the way for a new history.
Hello and welcome to Tochnyi Weekly, the show that gets behind the headlines to discuss the Russian invasion of Ukraine. We have a great show for you today. If you could, please do subscribe to the Tochnyi channel and like the stream. Really helps us out, spreads the word. We also have a Twitter and a Blue Sky. You can visit us there for updates and things like that. If you could also check out our website, tochnyi.info. There's a lot of great research and articles there. We recently published an article by one of our contributors about the unsustainable cost of Russia's regional recruitment. So it's definitely worth checking out tochnyi.info. We publish lots of different research articles. And if you hear something here that you want covered in more depth, we might have an article about it. And then if you have any questions, chat, you're always welcome to ask them. And we'll do our best to get to them at the end. Cool. So first I'll present the news. That'll be followed by our Russian economy segment with Stanimir, and then we'll maybe talk about some other stuff, and then we'll do a Q&A. So without any further delay, I will now present the news. These are the main headlines as of November 30th, 2025. First up, we have operations. Ukrainian naval units working alongside special forces carried out a coordinated strike on Russian positions in Crimea. The operation began with small, first-person view drones targeting defensive systems, clearing the way for larger aircraft to assault storage areas for unmanned aircraft at Saki Air Base. Footage of the mission was released by Ukraine's Naval Command. The country's military leadership reported that the strike damaged the facility's command post, warehouses holding Orion and four-post unmanned aircraft, and several defensive installations that guard the airfield. The video indicates that before the main wave of unmanned aircraft arrived, Tor M2 and Pantsir S1 systems protecting the base were disabled by the smaller drones. One of the disabled units was a rare Arctic-specific variant of the Tor system, mounted on a two-section tracked vehicle designed for remote and frigid terrain. This system was originally intended to guard military formations and key sites in Russia's northern territories. Only one Arctic brigade of Russia's coastal forces had been outfitted with these units. As of 5 years ago, Russia was believed to possess around a dozen of them, with only 2 earlier losses confirmed last year in the Kherson area. The manner in which the small drones reached Crimea was not revealed, although the use of seaborne unmanned devices and carrier aircraft appears likely. Once the defensive perimeter around the airfield was neutralized, the larger unmanned aircraft equipped with cameras and real-time links struck designated locations. The video captures an unmanned aircraft hitting the Aviation Command Center in Crimea, and another target was a truck-mounted Zu-23-2 weapon system, which appeared to be attempting to counter the incoming drones before being destroyed. Ukrainian maritime units used Sea Baby surface drones to strike 2 Russian oil tankers operating outside legal channels in the Black Sea. The targeted vessels, identified as Cairo and Virat, are part of a fleet used by Moscow to skirt international restrictions. Footage of the action was shared by a Ukrainian activist on his Telegram channel. The mission involved personnel from the Security Service's 13th Counterintelligence Division working in coordination with the Navy. The media reports stated that upgraded versions of the Sea Baby craft, adapted for extended range and equipped with strengthened explosive payloads, were deployed. Both tankers are linked to a covert supply chain that enables Russia to continue moving fuel despite global restrictions. At the time of the incident, they were en route without cargo to Novorossiysk to collect oil. Earlier in the autumn, Ukraine unveiled a new generation of Sea Baby vessels built for complex maritime missions in the region. Images from the latest operation show one of the tankers engulfed in flames following the impact of a drone on November 28. The newest models of these unmanned aircraft can cover more than 1,500 kilometers, transport loads of up to 2 tons, and are powered by high-performance engines with advanced navigation capabilities. Ukrainian unmanned naval craft also struck the Caspian Pipeline Consortium's maritime terminal near Novorossiysk, rendering part of the facility inoperable. Russian media reported that one of the docking platforms sustained structural harm, leaving it unable to continue functioning. Terminal officials acknowledged that cargo handling has been halted and tankers were moved out of the area. Automated safety mechanisms shut off associated pipelines, preventing crude from flowing into the Black Sea. According to the consortium, Ukrainian naval craft disabled the remote mooring system known as the VPO-2. The damage was described as beyond repair, which forced the suspension of oil exports from the site. The consortium's press office stated that the incident took place on the morning of November 29th. According to them, a subsequent examination verified that the equipment had suffered heavy damage and no longer met operational standards. On the same day, aerial units struck the AFIP oil processing plant, igniting a fire within the facility grounds. Well, the sea babies have certainly been busy, huh? Ukrainian unmanned aircraft forces carried out a long-range strike on a facility that manufactures navigation components used in Shahed drones and Caliber cruise missiles. The mission, known as Deep Strike, was conducted roughly 1,000 kilometers from Ukraine's border. During the night of November 26th, operators from the First Separate Center of Unmanned Systems, acting in coordination with Ukrainian defense units, hit the VNIIR Progress plant located in Cheboksary in Russia's Chuvash Republic. The facility is responsible for producing satellite navigation receivers and antennas compatible with GLONASS, GPS, and Galileo systems, along with Kometa modules designed to withstand electronic countermeasures. These components are integrated into several Russian weapon platforms, including the Caliber, the Kh-69, the Iskander-M, and the S-800 Banderol, as well as unmanned aircraft such as the Shahed, Orlan 10, and Forepost. The Kometa unit also forms part of the Unified Modules for Planning and Correction, which allow Russia to adapt standard aerial bombs into precision-guided munitions. Footage and reports from the scene showed blasts and a fire spreading across the factory complex after the strike. Russian officials stated they are still reviewing the full extent of the damage. The partisan group Atesh stated that they carried out an operation in Rostov-on-Don that resulted in the destruction of a locomotive transporting supplies for Russian forces. Atesh's activities range from collecting information to damaging transport routes and equipment, which complicates the movement of personnel and material and forces Russia to devote time and resources to protection and repairs. The group stated on its Telegram channel that the incident took place on an important distribution point for Russia's southern and eastern military units, delaying deliveries of ammunition, hardware, and additional personnel. They stated that some of its members operate within Russia's railway units, claiming that dissatisfaction over unpaid compensation has created many opportunities for them to recruit insiders. According to the group, its operations relay information every day and carry out acts of sabotage to interfere with the supply network. The message added that the organization is growing, with more Russian service members allegedly seeking to cooperate or switch sides. The group called for additional participation, saying that it would safeguard the identities and offer incentives to those who contribute information or undertake in further disruptive actions. Up next, we have economy and aid. The International Monetary Fund has reached a preliminary understanding with Ukraine on a new package worth $8.2 billion over 4 years, arranged through an updated extended fund facility. In its announcement, the fund stated that the conflict had placed severe pressure on Ukraine's society and financial system. The deal outlines fiscal and monetary steps intended to preserve economic stability, restore the government's ability to meet its obligations, rebuild foreign reserves, curb graft, and strengthen institutions. Ukraine has already received $10.6 billion from an ongoing $15 billion IMF arrangement that runs through 2027. The new deal is intended to support the country's finances from 2026 through 2029. Kyiv sought this assistance in September of 2025 as its budget has come under increasing strain. According to Ukraine's draft 2026 budget, all domestic tax income will be redirected to the armed forces, totaling roughly $62.8 billion US dollars. The state depends on foreign partners for other expenditures, including pensions and essential public services. Officials warn that pledged aid will soon decline and that Ukraine needs $61 billion in 2026 and 2027 to avoid a significant shortfall. The IMF package would only cover a fraction of this, but fund officials emphasize that swift contributions from international partners are essential to help Ukraine meet its financing needs and prevent cash flow problems. The fund also noted that the program may be adjusted over time depending on developments. The arrangement links disbursements to Ukraine fulfilling specific reform commitments. These include safeguarding independent bodies investigating financial wrongdoing, improving tax compliance, enhancing competition and transparency in government procurement, expanding the tax base, and other measures designed to reinforce long-term economic stability. The proposal still requires approval from the IMF board and depends on Ukraine completing the required steps and securing commitments from donor nations. Ukraine's president approved measures implementing a National Security and Defense Council decision targeting 56 ships that entered ports under Russian control and transported Ukrainian grain and other produce between 2022 and 2025. The order, numbered 860-2025, appeared on the presidential website. The announcement states that these vessels hauled large quantities of wheat, sunflower seeds, and additional foodstuffs taken from closed ports in Sevastopol and Feodosia and carried them abroad. Many of these ships are already subject to restrictions issued by other governments, including those in the European Union, the United States, and Switzerland. 17 of the vessels did not use the Russian flag, operating instead under registrations from other nations. The president's office said that Ukraine plans to coordinate with those governments to halt the issuance of permits that allow sanctioned vessels to operate. According to Ukraine's presidential representative overseeing sanctions policy, roughly 6 out of 10 vital components and manufacturing tools required by Russia's military industry originate in China. Responding to a question about how Russia still acquires goods with both civilian and military applications despite restrictions, the official explained that Moscow had amassed large reserves before its wider assault on Ukraine and has since benefited from extensive deliveries from China. Current estimates indicate that no less than 60% of essential inputs for Russia's defense sector come from that country. He noted that Russia also maintains limited access to certain parts through countries that maintain a degree of cooperation with Moscow. As an example, he cited a Kh-101 missile produced this October that contained about 125 U.S.-made components from different years, which likely reached Russia through several intermediary states. According to the official, Ukrainian specialists examine every component recovered from Russian weapons, documenting serial numbers, identifying production dates when possible, reviewing available data, and forwarding these findings to partner governments. He stressed the need to expand export control lists that prohibit sending specific items to Russia and reinforce law enforcement efforts aimed at uncovering the networks that continue to supply Moscow through indirect routes. Up next, we have international relations. Russian drones crashed into local farms in Romania and Moldova on November 25th. In Romania's village of Puiesti, sorry if we have any Romanian viewers, about 50 kilometers from Moldova, a drone struck a tree on private property. In Moldova's village of Ciuhuresti de Jos, a similar incident occurred when a drone came down on a farm building just 15 kilometers from Ukraine. These crashes took place during one of the most significant intrusions into the airspace of both countries since the start of the full-scale invasion. 6 Russian drones crossed into Moldova that morning, while the unmanned aircraft that landed in Romania appears to have flown for hours across Romanian territory, triggering mobile alerts in several regions. Moldova lacks modern air defenses and was unable to respond. Romania, protected by NATO, dispatched 4 Allied fighter jets, including 2 flown by German pilots, yet they repeatedly lost track of the drone and did not engage it. The devices that fell were not carrying warheads and are typically used as decoys or for intelligence gathering. Flight routes indicate they traveled from Crimea, crossing the Black Sea toward the Danube Delta, and then into Moldova and eastern Romania, raising suspicion that their entry was intentional. Neither government, however, has openly accused Russia of deliberately targeting them. Moldovan authorities summoned Russia's ambassador, while Romania has yet to formally react. Romanian authorities have repeatedly confronted Moscow over prior violations, including presenting recovered drone fragments to the Russian envoy earlier this month. Both nations have endured numerous breaches of their airspace caused by Russian drones and missiles, with several incidents causing blasts near the Danube. In early November, a drone detonated near the town of Galati, and only days ago, residents in Plouru were evacuated after a drone strike on a nearby Ukrainian port ignited a tanker and threatened a major explosion mere meters from Romanian territory. The Russian president approved a directive on November 25th that sets out a national policy framework running through 2026 and formally places 4 Ukrainian regions seized by Moscow into a plan focused on reshaping their local identity. The document outlines measurable objectives aimed at absorbing these territories into Russia's ethnic, cultural, and administrative systems and diminishing Ukrainian self-identification. For Ukrainians living under Russian control, the strategy confirms what rights monitors have long described as an effort to erase Ukrainian heritage and eliminate space for Ukrainian cultural or civic expression. The text refers repeatedly to Crimea, along with the Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson regions, designating them as areas needing special integration measures under Russian oversight. Mandatory steps include setting up governance bodies to oversee national policy implementation in all 4 regions, incorporating the territories into Russia's legal system and public institutions, imposing state-approved interpretations of history, and ensuring millions of residents take part in nationwide events by 2036. The strategy places Russian language at the center of shaping civic identity. One provision instructs authorities to promote and reinforce Russian as the primary language and as the basis for national cohesion. This formalizes measures that have already been reported, including plans to remove Ukrainian from educational programs in the occupied territories beginning in late 2025. Children and young adults are a key focus in the text. The document requires authorities to involve youth from Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson in nationwide educational and cultural initiatives, competitions, and projects. further binding the younger generation to Russia's institutional and ideological structures. Legal and human rights experts state that the document violates several aspects of the UN Charter. Ukraine, along with Slovakia and Slovenia, secured seats on the Executive Council of the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons for the 2026 to 2028 term. Russia failed to win election for the council for a third consecutive attempt, according to a statement issued by Ukraine's top diplomat. The foreign minister said that member states rejected Russia's bid because the country repeatedly is accused of breaching the Chemical Weapons Convention and should not have a role in steering the organization's leadership structure. He added that Ukrainian diplomats acting under presidential direction work continuously with allied governments to secure the outcome. The official described the result as both a distinction and a tool that will enable Ukraine to push for timely and appropriate reactions to chemical risks linked to Russia's actions. He said that Ukraine intends to keep advocating for adherence to international rules and will contribute to efforts aimed at preventing the misuse of chemical agents worldwide. And last item this week, Ukraine's former presidential chief of staff announced plans to travel to the front lines after stepping down amid a sweeping corruption probe. In a letter provided by the New York Post, he portrayed himself as someone facing retaliation and insisted that he had acted honorably in his office. His statement followed searches carried out by the National Anti-Corruption Bureau at his residence on the same day as part of an extensive investigation into alleged large-scale misappropriation at the state nuclear energy company, Energoatom. The case is the most consequential corruption inquiry in the current administration and has already resulted in the removal of the country's energy and justice ministers. Yermak did not clarify when he intends to deploy or whether he will enlist in Ukraine's military. In his letter, he said he chose to quit to prevent political damage to the head of state, noting that he had remained in Kyiv since the start of the full-scale invasion and now preferred not to create further complications. Ukraine's ambassador in Washington confirmed the search at his home, but said that investigators took no formal procedural steps afterward, adding that his resignation was meant to shut down speculation. Appointed in 2020, he had become a dominant figure within government circles, exerting influence over national security, foreign policy, and internal affairs. Although critics like me have accused him of accumulating excessive power, the country's leader has consistently defended him and dismissed such claims. Earlier in the month, Ukraine's top anti-corruption prosecutor released a report that stated that an individual like Yermak held meetings and issued directives aimed at putting pressure on bureau detectives and prosecutors investigating corruption. This report is said to have increased efforts inside the presidential team to remove him in order to regain public confidence. And that's it for the main items this week. We will now move to the next segment. Okay, so that brings us to the update on the Russian economy with Stanimir. So, when I'm scooping around for headlines and scoops and such, I sometimes encounter what the Western media is reporting on in regards to Russia, but then I go, oh, right, that's Stanimir's thing. That's not my thing. But when I see a consistent pattern of coverage, I try to get Stanimir's take on it just because I think it's helpful to get a little bit more of understanding of how the Russian media is portraying it and if it was all kind of translated correctly and if they understand how the Russian system works and things like that. So we got a little bit of stuff to talk about this week. The first, I think, is the shortest Stanimir, which is just trucks continue to be stuck at the Kazakhstan border, and you were also mentioning the Chinese border. So there's a big glut of trucks that have been stuck at the border for, I would say, in Kazakhstan at this point, months. I don't know how long in China. So you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, in Kazakhstan, it's due to increased checks for trucks that are going towards Russia. And I think the last time I checked, the column was 45 kilometers long, so something like that. It's a big queue. And also there is trucks on the Chinese border, but that's more to do with the new recycling fee that's going into effect from tomorrow, I think. So what Chinese companies try to do is they rush trucks with cars to ship them to Russia before the recycling fee goes into effect. And they fill in warehouses in Russia and then sell the inventory at the old prices because they're not covered by the recycling fee. So that's why you have usually such a big push at the end of October, November. But for the Kazakhstan part, that's a new thing for this year, yes. It hasn't happened before. The border is checked significantly now. They just don't have enough people to check all the trucks.
I would describe those as like pretty vital transport routes for Russia, right? I would say if we're like we drop the illusions, a lot of that stuff on the Kazakh border is stuff that third-party countries like the Central Asian countries have bought to sell to Russia at a premium rate, right, to bypass sanctions. So that's like a vital channel for Russia to get stuff in. And then obviously China, I mean, it goes without saying, it's a very important economic channel for Russia. So would you say those are like important routes for Russia? How bad is it that they're all clogged up?
Well, for Kazakhstan, it's very bad for certain industries because they rely on production from Russia to be sent to China or to Kazakhstan. One of this is the lumber industry, which has also been hit, I previously mentioned, by the reduction of the visa-free travel for foreigners within Russia. So yeah, for some things it's vital, and also it's a way to bypass some of the Russian-imposed sanctions on the West. So, for example, Kazakhstan started importing a lot of European beer and then reselling it as Kazakhstan beer and importing it into Russia. That was one way to bypass the Russian duties on beer from non-friendly countries. And the same thing is happening with those other types of alcohol. So this is one of the reasons why the channel is also stressed.
Yeah, so I guess, we've talked about it a little bit, but we just wanted to mention it's continuing. There's a little bit of coverage on it. we only found one good video of it, the actual picture of the line in Kazakhstan. I don't know if there's any of the line in China, but I think it's a pretty significant story. It's good that the media once in a while brings it up. Okay, and then the next one is, this one is, I think, much more confusing, which is Russia. I would say in the Western media, the headline was Russia is selling its gold reserves. But I think that's like a really bad way to frame what is actually happening. It's very confusing. We're going to do our best to parse it out for people. So, Stanimir, why don't we start with like what the Moscow Times said Russia is doing, and then we'll try to explain from there, do you think? Or how do you want to explain it to the good people?
Yeah, we can start from there.
Okay, so sorry, I just got to pull up my little Moscow Times article here. Okay, so they said the central bank for the first time has begun selling physical gold from its reserves as part of a finance ministry operation to fund the state budget. The move mirrors previous transactions from the National Wealth Fund, which until now were largely virtual. In those operations, the government sold to the central bank while keeping bullion in the country's reserves. So again, there's the National Wealth Fund, which is like a stockpile of Russia that they have money to use, and then there's also the central bank, which controls the Russian ruble and the currency. Russia's gold holdings exceed 2,300 tons, which is the fifth largest gold reserve in the world, and they held 405 tons before the full-scale invasion. And their overall liquid assets in the National Wealth Fund, this is again all according to the Moscow Times, have fallen 55% to 51.6 billion US dollars worth of gold and Chinese yuan. And the general, I would say the general point of all that is like Russia is selling its gold because its economy is spiraling, and they're I don't know, they're running out of gold to sell, I think is kind of the frame of the story, or how it's been discussed. So yeah, Stanimir, do you want to like clarify a little bit what's going on with the Russian gold and how it relates to the Russian budget and the Russian economy?
So the first part is that the Russian gold from the National Welfare Fund has been sold and has been taken, has lost a lot of value. So a lot of the National Welfare Fund, as you said, 57%, has indeed been sold for rubles to fund the deficit in the previous years. And we expect by probably the end of March, the end of April, the end of January, to see a significant decrease, or even all the liquid assets in the National Welfare Fund to be exhausted. So that's gold and that's yuan, what's left inside of it that can be easily converted into rubles to subsidize the budget. What the Russian central bank is doing and has been doing, I think this year, this is not the first time, is it started mirroring some of the operations by the Russian finance ministry, which, according to their budget rule, depending on how much oil revenue they get, oil and gas revenue they get, they either buy foreign currency or they sell foreign currency. And this also includes gold. So they've sold a bit of gold this year from the reserves to mirror this. And I think it's 6.2 tons, so it's not a big amount. I don't think they're going to start selling massively from the reserves, because previously they've done different things. They started borrowing a lot more with floating debt from the banks, and the central bank has managed to subsidize those banks in a different scheme. So I don't think we have a major story of the Russian central bank selling off their reserves. They're just selling a bit of gold. And 6 tons for the entire year is not that much.
Okay, so yeah, you would say that it's the current use of gold by the Russian budget is pretty typical with how they've used it in general, and the reporting that is coming out in the Western media that's basically, oh, Russia's selling gold reserves, that's like a really big deal, is kind of overblown. I would say that's like the summary.
Yeah, but they will sell everything they have in the National Welfare Fund, probably, like I said, by the end of January this year, because the deficit is bigger than what's in the National Welfare Fund.
Right. So I know that's definitely a big symbolic thing. Like Russia had this giant national welfare fund or national wealth fund, and that it sort of implies they've run out of money. But would you say that's what that means, or would you classify it differently?
They run out of the last easy to get money from their point of view. Now, the National Welfare Fund also has a lot of assets that are not as liquid because it has bought stocks of big companies like Sberbank, VTB. Part of their stocks that the Russian government owns is within the National Welfare Fund, or there are guarantees for loans that VTB, for example, is going to give to Russian railways, which come from the National Welfare Fund. They still have options, but all those options to take money out of the National Welfare Fund come in with a lot of problems, selling off assets that you probably don't want to sell. And also earlier in the year, they managed to sell almost everything they can sell from the VTB Bank stock with the stock split to the point that now the Russian government controls only 50% plus one stock from VTB. So they're at the limit of what they can do. And from here on out, it's expensive debt and probably repo auctions, which have gone from, let's say, 3 months ago, the repo auctions by the central bank were around around a trillion rubles. And this week, the repo auction for the banks, which supposedly don't have issues with liquidity, was 2.85 trillion. So bigger than even the 1 trillion they were earlier, plus the floating debt they sold a few weeks ago. So that's the option. The Russian central bank just sort of kind of printing money, even though supposedly there's enough money from the smaller banks, which is on deposit in the Russian central bank, to lend to the bigger banks, which have liquidity issues. But more and more people are talking about just money being pushed into the system.
Yeah, so I think that's kind of the big story, right? Russia's sovereign wealth fund or national welfare fund is running out, and yeah, we'll see what the consequences of that are very soon, I think. So
I have a question.
Oh, go ahead, Andrew.
Okay, so you said that they're gonna run out in January, right? So, how are they gonna fund like March? Like, what do you think they'll do? Once that fund is gone, like what? Or are they gonna try to like push it off to the end of the year and try to like figure things like fudge numbers until then? Like what actions do you expect us to see in the months after January?
Well, first I have to point out that January is going to be a shock for the system, because what happens when they push all this spending to the end of the year is that a lot of companies in Russia haven't received money from the government contracts they worked on. So they have waited for a few months for that. The second thing is going to happen is I'm expecting them to start borrowing a lot more. And when borrowing a lot more, I'm expecting the interest rate on their debt to rise again above 15%, because right now it's down to below 15% again. But I'm expecting it to go above 15%, and I'm expecting there to be floating debt auctions within January to March. And the other thing is, like I said, they defer payments till the moment they have the money. So that is going to additionally throttle the Russian economy.
So, like, basically, in order to pay for it, they're going to have to start doing a lot more damage, like long-term damage to their economy, I think is like the general summary, right?
Yeah, we're talking about some of the debt that they're selling right now. It's not going to mature for another 15 to 20 years. A lot of it is 8 years, 6 years, but a lot of it is also 15, 20 years, something like that. So it's not looking pretty. This is going to be with them for a while. And these are fixed coupons. So the agreed upon yield stays for the duration of the debt. And I'm not seeing anyone actually offering them cheaper debt. For example, China. China has stayed away from the Russian debt market consistently.
Well, who is going to buy it? Like, I know in the last, every time they've tried to sell, they never seem to sell as much as they want to. So who's going to buy it? Who has the capital?
Well, it's usually Russian banks and Russian pension funds. For example, if you're a spare bank, you can buy Russian debt, and that for you is a secure investment because you can't handle the risk of the Russian economy collapsing because you're tied entirely into Russia. So that's an existential threat you can't account for. So that's a cheap way to make money through fixed income. So usually it's the banks and the pension funds, which are often pension funds of the bigger banks in Russia. We're talking Sberbank, which is state-owned, VTB, which is another state-owned, Alpha Bank, T-Bank, which was the former Tikov Bank, but now it's owned by other people. And the final one in the top 5 is Sovcom Bank. So these are the usual buyers of this debt. And like I said earlier, the Russian central bank has been offering them money through repo deals every week, and it's growing at a rate of 200% in 3 months, the amount of repo funds available for the Russian banks. So that's one option they have in terms of Russia central bank providing money to the banks, just printing it and handing them over.
Yeah, so I guess, like, to summarize, they can sell it to Russian banks and pension funds, but that required, like, number one, that is sort of a giant pyramid scheme. Eventually, if they ever run into problems, it would collapse the whole thing. And also, because of that, they have to offer relatively high rates compared to, like, what a normal country could go to a different country and say, hey, you want to buy some of my debt? And the other country goes, sure. Then that would be a lot cheaper. So in order to overcome all the issues selling it to their own internal domestic market, they have to raise the rates. Is that, like, accurate, Stanimir?
Yeah, because they have to sell more debt, they have to raise the rates. But it's also a situation where the central bank is offering more money to banks through the repo deals, and at the same time saying we're tightening the monetary policy by raising the interest rate or keeping the interest rate higher. It's kind of an oxymoron. One part of it doesn't compute with the other part. But this is what they need to do to sustain the Russian budget in terms of finding funds and finding buyers for Russian debt, because there are no external buyers for Russian debt. It's entirely domestic right now.
I think that's crazy too, Andrew. Any final questions?
I'm just curious. Do you think they'll raise the amount of money that they intend to, or do you think they'll fall short? Because they've always, like, every time I look, it seems that they're falling short of what they intend to raise, and then they have to make up for it through their fund, their sovereign wealth fund. So once that fund's gone, do they have the mechanism to force people to buy more or to buy the full amount? Like, what's going to happen?
So they fell short in terms of having a budget deficit when they expected not to have budget deficits. But when it comes to targets for selling debt, they've usually managed to achieve them. They just haven't been funding the entire deficit through selling debt. That's the reason they haven't used that till now, because they had the National Welfare Fund to borrow money from it. They have a mechanism to make people buy more debt offer it at 20% interest, and people will buy it. Even private investors will open a brokerage account and ask for a way to buy it. They want to sell it at a lower rate, so something like 14% is okay for them, but they would prefer something like 9-10%. But right now, the reality is they're selling it at 14.7, 14.9. And if they want to sell more to cover the entire deficit without any instruments, they have to raise the rates for that debt. So that's the instrument they have to attract people to buy it. But I also have to say that it's becoming an unmaintainable thing, because it's servicing this domestic debt is going to reach something like 12-15% of the Russian budget, the federal budget, that is. And that's a considerable amount, given that they have so little debt in terms of debt to GDP ratio, if we're looking at the domestic debt. But it's because it's so expensive, they're having problems servicing, and it's eating away at their budget.
And I guess like ultimately their currency will start just weakening like crazy, right? Like that would be.
That is the expectation, yes, when you pump money into the system. But that's the other thing. They want their currency to weaken. At least they want it to weaken against the dollar and the euro and the yuan, because right now Russian exporters are earning a lot less money than before, because the ruble is too strong in terms of the exchange rate with other currencies. So they're losing a lot of money because of this high exchange rate, from exporting coal, from exporting oil, from exporting petroleum products, from exporting metals and exporting wheat and everything.
Yeah, I guess like the best way I can try to frame it in my head is like there's still a little ways to rock bottom for their economy. And every time they slide down to a new level, there are like self-correction mechanisms in the market that like help them a little bit. Like the market's trying to stabilize it, but they just keep sliding down a little further and a little further. So we're going to see these like slides down followed by a little stabilization, followed by a slide down for like, I don't know, a little while. I don't know how long they can sustain that, but that's kind of how I'm picturing it based on what you're describing.
Yeah, something a bit like that. But they're close to having serious problems in terms of subsidizing their budget deficit. To the point that a few months ago, the Russian finance minister said that people should be more modest in their expectations from the budget. So he signaled that there's not enough money to go around. They have to cut things.
Yeah, and I guess, you know, just as a final note, they mentioned that there's been a lot of media discussion, and it was mentioned a lot with this Russian gold reserve thing, that their GDP growth this year is going to be 1%, which I assume is also accounting for all the military spending and production that they already did. So it seems like, you know, they've definitely run out of steam, and they're staring down stagnation or retraction for sure. Yeah, I don't know. Anything else about this gold stuff, Stanimir?
No, I think we covered most of it.
Cool. Okay. And then the final story, of course, is that Russia has been forced to halt missions involving human crews after a mishap at the Baikonur Cosmodrome during the launch of the Soyuz MS-28 spacecraft. Erlend, I got some B-roll. It's yeah, if you can throw it up there. Cool. Yeah. So this was I would say pretty widely covered both in space news and in just regular media outlets. The pictures are quite dramatic. There was an issue where the cabin was like still there. I don't know, Andrew, I think can you explain what happened, or should I summarize it?
I don't know if I can explain what happened. From what I understand, they tried to secure it in place correctly following their protocol, and they didn't. They didn't do that at all. And instead of securing it in place, it toppled over, and it fell, and now it's broken. And they claim to have spare parts to repair it, I have no idea if that's true or not. This structure, building, whatever you want to call it, this was manufactured in Ukraine in like the 1960s. I don't know if they can make another one. It's kind of ancient, and I don't know what their spare part situation is. I know that there was another launch facility pretty close to this. I don't know if it uses the same structures and spare parts or not. It was recently closed and turned into a museum. To put things in perspective here, so yeah, I don't really know what else to say beyond that, other than I personally find it funny, but yeah, it's kind of an unfortunate thing for their space program, which has lots of unfortunate things going on all the time.
Yeah, it's just, I guess, it's a really big deal. Until they get this thing fixed, they can't go into space. And that's one thing I would say the Russians have mentioned is like they've had the capacity to launch things into space since the 60s. And now suddenly they don't have it. And then, it's just, I guess, a slightly embarrassing story for them. And I don't know, got a lot of coverage. Stanimir, anything you wanted to say about just like Russian coverage of it, or any remarks you have?
I don't think it made the top coverage, but they did cover it. I saw that people who usually cover Russian space stuff covered, but beyond that, it didn't make that much of a splash in regional news. I checked them all this weekend.
Yeah, so there you go. A lot of stories about Russia this week. So that was my questions for Stanimir. Now, of course, Stanimir is going to give us an update on the Russian economy itself. So, Stanimir, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Yeah, just something final to add about that incident. That they talk a lot more about the spacecraft going up to the International Space Station, and they said almost nothing about the incident. So that's how they covered it. Yay, big success! We sent a spacecraft, and then almost nothing about the accident.
A minor setback.
Yes. Very minor. Just a bit of duct tape and metal plates.
All right.
So, yeah. Now I'll start with a bit of the fuel issues. So this week, only one region was singled out. That was the Yamal-Nenets Autonomous Region. Its capital of Sakhdar, Salekhard, had issues with Rosneft gas stations being out of gasoline. What else happened in terms of gasoline news? That the initiative to start using ethanol in Russian gasoline has been put forward. The issue is just going to be with some older Russian car engines that are still in production, and people are expecting mainly WAZ and gas vehicles to have problems. And also another big thing that they did is that they're going to allow Russian gas stations to raise the price of gasoline beyond the inflation rate. They will no longer be bound by the inflation rate, and if they have enough reason to raise the prices beyond the regulation rate, they're going to be allowed to do that by the Federal Anti-Monopoly Service, which means prices for gasoline are going to start going higher than what the country's inflation rate is, the official one. So that's bad for Russian consumers. So then we had some news on the problems between Russian online marketplaces and Russian banks, with the banks saying that Russian online marketplaces are doing scams with their own banks.
Stanimir?
Yes.
It seems like you have an audio connection issue. Maybe try and refresh and come back, because
Stanimir's it's been revealed he's an AI.
I don't know. It was some very strange audio artifacts.
Yeah.
So, anyways,
he's coming back now.
oh, there he is.
How am I now?
Loud and clear.
Okay. So, like I said, this week, the head of the Russian Duma party, Adjust Russia, Mironov, sent a letter to the central bank head Nabiullina, advocating for the Russian online marketplaces to retain their bank loyalty programs because they're a benefit to consumers. Basically, Nabiullina wants to ban online marketplaces from having their own banks and a financial ecosystem to sell financial products in their marketplaces. And also Russian banks are against that, even though Russian banks like Sberbank have their own online marketplaces where they do the same thing. So the opposition is acting like opposition in this regard, but the topic is still ongoing. We also had news that Roskomnadzor is threatening to shut down WhatsApp in Russia because it says it doesn't comply with the law and that the messenger is used to conduct terrorism inside Russia. Anything can be used to conduct terrorism inside Russia because of the broad definition of terrorism inside Russia. So you should assume that they're just going to ban it in a number of days or weeks. We also had data from Sberbank on Russian consumers' consumption for the week of the 17th to the 23rd of November. And something that's a new trend in November is that it's 0.2% lower than in November 2024, when in October consumption was growing by 2%, so a steady growth. And it went from growing several percent at the start of the year on top of the official inflation to now being below growth and shrinking, which is an interesting thing because also savings, the savings rate is continuing to decrease. So both things suggest that something's not correct with the figures. We also had an increase in the third quarter in terms of the money in circulation in Russia by 659 billion rubles, which is 5 times higher than the growth in the third quarter of 2024. And a higher growth has only been seen in 2022. So what I mentioned earlier is that Russian banks and the Russian central bank are starting to print money at an accelerated rate to subsidize the budget. Also, we had news that in terms of major dividend payers for the third quarter or for the first 9 months of the year that pay right now, the dividends paid in 2025 will be only 640 billion rubles, whereas in 2024 there were almost twice as much, with 1.2 trillion rubles being paid in dividends. So another indication that profits are going down for Russian major companies. We also had the bank release data on bad loans. So for the corporate lending segment in Russia, the bad loans rose to 10.4 trillion rubles at the end of the third quarter. And according to the Russian central bank, this is 11.4% of all corporate loans. And for individual lending, the growth for 2025 has been 3.8% to 12.9% at the end of the third quarter of 2025. So both individual lending and corporate lending, we have over 10% of the loans being described as bad loans by the Russian central bank, which is a bad indication for Russian banks overall. And another sign of that is that for the first 9 months of 2025, Russian collecting agencies received 1.2 trillion rubles of overdue debt, linked to 46.9 million loans, and this is 57.6% higher in terms of ruble value than it was for the first 9 months of 2024, and 65.7% more in terms of a number of loans than in 2024. And I have to add that only 2022 as a year had a higher number of loans and a higher ruble value of loans received by collecting agencies than for the first 9 months of 2025. The entirety of 2024, 2023, and 2020 were all smaller than this amount in terms of how much Russian collecting agency got. We also had one final big story that for the first 9 months of the year, the Russian railways net profit decreased by 76% to 24.9 billion rubles. And the revenue for the company grew by 10.6% to 2.7 trillion rubles, but this is under the international accounting standards, so it includes more than the usual Russian accounting standards, What is a problem for the company is that between the second quarter and the third quarter, its debt grew from 3.3 trillion rubles to 4 trillion rubles. And the Russian government is looking for ways to stabilize the company, including capping the interest rates of its debt to 9%, which will usually hurt the creditors of the Russian railways. But the situation in the Russian railways is very difficult because they're looking at if they put a cap on the interest rate on the debt of Russian railways, they're going to save 64 billion rubles in a year. So this debt is that heavy for the Russian railways. When it comes to metals in terms of commodities, we had some good news for Russia's metallurgists. So the amount of semi-finished steel products that they exported to Turkey have grown by 49.5%, and they have now a market share of 51%. However, this is not enough for the sector because we're talking about just a few million tons, and we're talking about a sector that's shedding probably over 10 million tons of production this year because of lack of demand domestically. When it comes to grain, bad news for Russian farmers. The Ministry of Agriculture for the last week of November is going to increase the duty on Russian wheat. Russia has an export duty on wheat, which is basically killing Russian wheat farmers, and they've complained about that significantly. So they're raising it by 14.6% until December 3rd, and it will go from 202 rubles per ton to 232 rubles per ton. They also had good news from the China market. They managed to export over 67,000 tons of oats this year, worth 15 million in October, not this year, worth $15 million. And this is the highest monthly export in the last 4 years. And China is the main buyer, with the purchases growing by 9% this year to 211,000 tons, and the value in terms of dollars rising by 17% to $47 billion. When it comes to coal, they managed to sell a new shipment of Handymax size to China when it comes to 6,000 kilocalorie coal at prices of $104 to $105 per ton, and prices for the 5,500 kilocalories coal also grew by 4.5% to $80.4. This is a good news for them, but that still means that Russian coal producers are still losing money all the time when they export because of the high transportation costs to reach the Chinese market. When it comes to gas and oil, the discount on Russian oil for India in recent days has risen from $3 per barrel to $7 per barrel, which is a huge decrease for them in terms of profitability. Gazprom released its figures for the first 9 months of the year and essentially for the third quarter. This is under the international standard, which includes everything, not just its gas business. But revenues dropped by 4.5% overall to 7.17 trillion rubles. And net profit rose by 12.9% to 1.2 trillion rubles. However, if we look just at the third quarter, revenue dropped by 9.8% and profit was only 148.2 billion rubles, shrinking and not growing. So they're going to have a problem with revenue, and they're going to have a problem with profit by the end of the year and the start of next year. And the net profit of Gazprom Neft also shrunk by 37.6% to 234 billion rubles for the first 9 months of the year. And for the revenue, it decreased by 11% to 2.7 trillion rubles. And for the third quarter, it was even worse, with profits decreasing 47% and revenue dropping by 8.9%. We also had data from the Russian oil pipeline operator Transneft. Its net profit for the first 9 months of the year decreased by 7.7%, while its revenue rose by 1.7%. The net profit came in at 232 billion rubles, and the revenue rose to 1.08 trillion rubles. The decrease in profit here is due to the high tax. So while other companies have a tax rate of 20-25% in Russia, for Transneft it's 40% because they voted a specific law for them to manage to push more into the budget from what the company is making. And the other final news when it comes to Russian oil, for the first 9 months of 2025, Russia's biggest oil company, Rosneft, so its net profit dropped by 70% to 277 billion rubles, and revenue dropped by 17.8%. And what's interesting here is that among the reasons they cite for this increase in costs and drop in profits was the increased cost to defend their facilities from drone attacks. So Ukraine is having an actual effect on Russia's oil sector as we speak. When it comes to the construction market, for the first 9 months of the year, investment in real estate in Russia decreased by 12% to 673 billion rubles, and by the end of 2025, it's expected to fall when compared to 2024 by 25% to 800 to 900 billion rubles. The Minister of Far Eastern Development has announced that they're going to release the preferential Arctic and Far Eastern mortgage to be used for secondary housing, so already built housing, not new housing. That would also raise the amount of money the Russian finance ministry has to spend on subsidizing mortgages, which is already a colossal amount. And we also have news that the secondary housing market for the first 9 months of the year decreased by 14% to just 1.1 million transactions. And the total ruble amount of these was 5.4 trillion rubles. Because of this, the fraud in such deals has also grown up by 15 to 20%. And the final news when it comes to construction, at the end of the first half of the year, Russia's largest real estate developers for the previous 12 months, so basically from the end of the first half of 2024 to the end of the first half of 2025, their profits decreased by 26.1%, and compared to that, revenue rose by 6.7%, and this is because the housing market in Russia is largely collapsing. Their costs are going up and their sales are going down, and they have to go into schemes to actually sell the limited amount of housing that's being sold. So things like offering an installment plan for the buyer, or offering subsidies to the mortgage company to offer a lower rate to the buyer of the home. When it comes to interesting data points, I just have one thing. The Autovaz or Lada factory is going to reduce its production in Tolyatti by 40% to 274,000 cars. In September, they projected that they're going to reduce the production of Tolyatti only to 300,000 cars, but because the market has a lot less demand, they're going to reduce it by another 26,000. So a significant amount. We should have a major story in Western papers if Western car manufacturer decreases production in a factory by 40% overall, and its main factory, that is. When it comes to inflation and debt, we had the inflation for the period of 18th to the 24th of November. It came in at 0.14%, so relatively high. For November 2025, the inflation so far that's been recorded is 0.4%, and for the year so far, 5.23%. I'm going to say that, as usual, they're not actually covering the actual fuel prices, but also, like I said last week, they managed to decrease by 0.3% the inflation in October, because for the month they said that foreign trips have become cheaper, hence they're going to reduce inflation, even though none of the weekly data supported it. They had two options for that this week. One managed to sell 113 billion rubles at a yield of 14.95%, and the other one was a smaller one at 21 billion rubles, and it managed to get a yield of 14.73%, hence they managed to sell a lot less. And I think that's it from me for this week.
Well, thank you, Stanimir. So yeah, as always, Stanimir will keep us updated on the Russian economy. So I believe... Oh, go ahead, Erlend.
I'm just putting up the Russian utility outages map because I guess I missed it due to the little audio hiccups earlier. But Stanimir has a new updated map out.
Yeah, and also there is a chart that show the graph that shows how much it is in comparison to previous years. So we're slightly above the 2024 average, I think, with this week having more than in the previous year. And some regions have seen improvement. Sabaikowski Krai have seen an improvement in terms of the number of outages, but other regions have had worse than before. And in Moscow region, we had outages. And like you know, there was targeted strikes by Ukrainian drones on a heating plant in Moscow region. So that's seen on the map. I don't think as a whole, the Russian utility sector is improving. I think it's actually getting slightly worse. But even if it's as bad as it was in the previous year, that's a horrific figure for them. And here you can see the weeks from the year. So 44th week, 45th week, and we're now at I think 48th week. And then in January we start again from the first week of the year up to a point around March.
Okay, well, thank you, Stanimir, for the graphs you do to keep track of Russian energy shortages and the utilities outages. And yeah, he'll keep everyone appraised on what's going on with the Russian economy. Subscribe to Stanimir on Twitter if you haven't yet. Okay, and then I think up next we have Q&A. Is that right, Erlend?
Yeah, I don't have any more segments. So if there are no other general comments from the panel, we can go to Q&A, but I haven't seen any questions yet. Or no, actually there are questions. Okay, let's start with Oimbubi. So Stanimir, are there countries who bet on that Russia will fault?
I don't know if there are countries that bet on Russia defaulting, because right now Russia defaulting for the new debt that they're issuing is mostly a Russian problem, and all the Russian players on the market are hoping that they don't have to deal with the default of the country and return of the situation in 1998. I don't know about other countries. So.
Okay, and I think you were into this topic a little bit before, but One Grail asks, do we have any guesses on the limit of Russia buying Russia's debt?
So right now, in terms of a single day of auctions, it's 1.7 trillion rubles, or 1.8 trillion rubles, I think, because there was also a fixed coupon issue. I don't know if we're going to think of a limit beyond that. I don't think they're going to sell more in a week than this. In terms of what the actual limit is and how much they can buy, it depends right now on the central bank and what it does, because I think to a large degree it's this. I wanted to reject it as an option, but the repo deals are what's funding it, it seems. When it comes to early reporting, there was something like 4 or 5 trillion rubles in terms of smaller banks' deposits of the central banks, which the central bank can offer as a repo. And basically, if that's your limit for what can be lent to big banks to buy debt, then that's another 2 trillion rubles. Maybe that, I don't know.
Okay, thank you. Marino is asking about what could be the next indicator that consolidates the Russian economy collapse. That's a big question.
Maybe a bigger collapse of the housing prices and a collapse of the housing sector further, because it managed to stabilize at a lower point, and they want to further increase the options in terms of preferential lending despite what the central bank tries to achieve with tightening. And the other thing maybe is we start seeing big defaults in terms of big companies. We have a few that have defaulted or had to restructure significantly their debt. I think the lumber company Segeja comes to mind, and also Metro in terms of the coal and steel, but we might see more of them. One thing that they were saying was that the Russian operators of malls, so shopping centers, are going to have to face defaults because they borrowed at a floating rate, and the high interest rate is killing them. So we might see that with several dozens of companies that operate these shopping centers starting to sell them just to make ends meet. But that's the next thing. We've already seen the collapse in the auto industry. I think this month, for the previous month, October, the decrease was 48.4% from October 2024 in terms of production volumes.
Yeah, thank you. And now we get to your favorite topic, Joseph, Andrei Yermak. To what extent is the Ukrainian defense production based on competent but corrupt power verticals like those under Yermak? And can clean hands come in and be as organized, more effective? Maybe Colby can answer a little bit to that as well. I hope.
Yeah, if Colby has anything to say, I'd like to hear what he has to say.
Sorry, just reading the question here again. Wow, this is this is a very, very complicated question to answer. I will just say that Yermak going is definitely a positive, but it's certainly going to depend on who replaces him, which I don't know if we know the answer to that question yet. I haven't seen anything about who Zelensky might appoint as his replacement in the presidential office. You guys can correct me if I've missed something, but I haven't seen that. So I kind of have to wait for that information before I can definitively say that things may or may not get better. Yermak was definitely a major, major problem for the Ukrainian war effort. In very broad terms, not specifically pertaining to matters of defense production, because that's not directly under his purview. He wasn't heading up Ministry of Strategic Industries or anything like that. But Yermak was a problem. It's good that he's gone. Hopefully somebody better replaces him. But until we know who that person is, it's difficult to say what the ultimate impact of this will be.
I think I just want
to
add. Yeah, thank you. I just want to add that even though there's definitely been problems in procurement, some related to maybe corruption, something definitely related to corruption, but I don't think that's necessarily the biggest issue that Ukraine has with its defense procurement issues. I think that's mostly about the lack of financing and not so much about the actual problems internally. Obviously, in the beginning of the dronization of the Ukrainian army, there were issues with new suppliers, but a lot of those issues have been addressed. So just wanted to throw that out there.
Lack of money, obviously a big issue. Corruption is definitely an issue. Lack of managerial competence, also definitely an issue. There's still pervasive within the Ukrainian state, within the Ukrainian military, all aspects of society. There's pervasive, basically just Soviet mentality at higher levels of leadership in any organization. This is a pervasive problem that is undermining Ukraine's ability to just modernize their processes and do things like functional Western organizations do things. So there's a lot of different things that are a problem. You can't just point to one thing as being a main impediment. It's very dynamic.
Yeah, I think you guys covered like the main aspects of it. I would just say generally, yeah, I think it's a good thing probably that this stuff gets cleaned up. Like, in other words, it's not a trade-off of like, oh, you need them to produce results. Generally, I think Ukraine has made a lot of strides in streamlining and making more transparent their procurement system. They have like a public bidding system that they use for a lot of military contracts and stuff. I assume that all that stuff makes procurement cheaper, and that's a good thing for the defense effort. So I would say in general, like cleaning up this corruption is like pretty much almost a universal positive. It's going to be pretty unusual that like the corruption was like greasing the wheels in a way that was beneficial. So yeah, I don't know. It's generally good. There's a lot of programs that are kind of helping Ukraine deal with some of these problems with, budgetary incentives, which is also good. And yeah, I don't know. It's obviously, as Colby and Erlend said, it's a very big, complicated topic, and it's difficult to nail down like one thing as like any kind of leading cause of inefficiencies or bottlenecks.
There's one point to make here. About 2 weeks ago, there was an event where two of Yermak's closest allies, or maybe not closest, but very close allies. One of them was the head of finance in Ukraine, and the other was, I believe, the head of the tax parliamentarian, the head of the tax committee, basically. These two people turned on Yermak and in support of the corruption investigation. And these two people are really important to the function of the Ukrainian government. And their turning on Yermak is probably playing a very big part in Yermak getting ousted. So that might illuminate things for you, that the people in charge of financing the country were ultimately the ones who probably pushed Yermak out.
Yeah, it's a good point, and that's reflects most of the media coverage I read, which was that there were some key changes of opinion and some key personnel at the high levels of the Ukrainian government that resulted in a calculation, I assume, by Zelensky that we've got to right the ship here, and Yermak was resigned or was dismissed. It's hard to say which, but officially, I believe he resigned. So. Favorite subject over, Erlend?
Yeah, well, there's been a lot of talk about it, and it got a lot of media attention. I'm personally happy that it's over and that Ukraine has the opportunity to look ahead and find new people to manage some of their most important roles. Because I think one of the most important messages here coming from Zelensky is that there's going to be a lot of changes in the office of the prime minister, which I think is a good sign personally. We'll see. Next question. Just my profile name asks, are scenarios realistic in which Russia's economy doesn't go down in a big bust, but rather spindles down fast and far enough so that they have to make big cuts to their war spending?
Well, we're going to see in 2026 because they didn't plan for the budget deficit the last 3 years when initially they did it. And every year, as Andrew said, they managed to hit a budget deficit despite this. And they've run out of cheap ways to stop that, to fund that. So we're going to see probably cuts to production in terms of state contracts, because they're just going to have less money, but they're probably first going to cut social services. They're going to index pensions a bit less than what they would like, and then they're going to increase taxes and tariffs to manage to find the funds. And when that doesn't happen, Russian state companies, and I want to point out that some of the biggest Russian defense procurement companies are state companies, they're going to start paying late as a habitual thing. And that's going to be a problem for the entire economy, and you're going to see a slowdown in terms of how equipment is trickling to the front. Because if they don't pay, the rest of the chain doesn't get money.
Yeah, thank you. Next question as well, from just my profile name. Could you please put the amount of money which is assumed to be used for corruption into relation to the overall Ukrainian budget? Not okay with corruption, but most of Ukraine's spending is legit. So that's just ending with a statement. I have the feeling that's correct as well, but I think that's a very difficult question to answer.
Yeah, I don't think that's quantifiable.
Right. I get like what we can say about this particular scheme, at least, right, is that it's said to be around 100 million for the energy stuff, the Energo Atom side of it, and then there was another scandal or corruption situation that involved weapons purchases for mortar shells, and basically, my understanding is like those companies were like steered towards those companies by certain people involved in this scheme. So that was another 40 million. So 140 million US dollars. The Ukrainian budget for the year is like something like 95 billion, I want to say. Just defense spending is something like 40 to 45 billion, somewhere in that range. So I don't know, like, not trying to downplay it. It's obviously a huge deal. $100 million is a lot of money, but if the question explicitly is asking in relation to the overall budget, how big is this corruption issue? This particular one that was uncovered by the anti-corruption investigation, I would say, pretty small, but too big to ignore, obviously.
Okay. Next question from Kellen. For Andrew Perpetua, what trends or things to notice in 2026 on the front lines for the AFU and Russia? Thank you for your stream earlier, Andrew.
Oh, well, I don't know. Nothing good, I would imagine. I suspect Russia is going to keep pushing towards Pavlograd. I think that is their primary goal. I think everything else is mostly a distraction. They're trying to pin down Ukrainian forces in other areas so that they can take advantage of the south and keep pushing, because it seems that Ukraine, for whatever reason, constantly deprioritizes the south. And that push towards Pavlograd is extraordinarily dangerous for Ukraine. It's really critically bad. I don't think it gets enough attention, and I think that's going to be probably the big story for next year. I don't imagine that they'll actually reach Pavlograd. They're very far from it, but every time they move towards it, it's very, very bad, very serious. And these cities in Donbass, they get a lot more press. They always have. For example, back when they were attacking Severodonetsk, I personally was writing about Avdiivka. I always saw Avdiivka as the bigger story. Nobody cared about Avdiivka. Everybody cared about Severodonetsk. Severodonetsk fell, didn't really matter. Avdiivka fell, and it's a disaster. So I think that this keeps happening. It happened in kind of Vuhledar, where the same thing, where they were focusing so much on Bakhmut that it weakened Vuhledar, and it didn't immediately weaken it, but it weakened it in the long term and eventually collapsed. And then it just this cycle keeps happening, and I think it's happening again, where people are focusing on like Konstantinivka and areas up there, and not really caring about Hulipola and the areas in the south that I think are much more critically important to this war, because Putin keeps saying that his goal is to capture Donbass. You keep seeing it in the news. It's not his goal. He does not care about Donbass. Putin wants Dnipro. That's his goal. And he is pushing towards Pavlograd. and then he's going to go towards Dnipro. That's his goal. That's his real goal. It always has been his goal, and that and Odessa. But obviously, Odessa is like not even on the table right now. But Donbass is just a headline that they feed to people to, don't know better. It's for ignorant people. So I think that's what you're going to see next year. I think you're just going to see this march towards Pavlograd. And I hope Ukraine can stop them, because it's really bad that this keeps happening. But I suspect the news headlines will be about Siversk, if it's still there. It probably won't be Slovyansk and those areas, when the actual war is being fought in the south, in Pokrovska and in Pavlograd and in those areas. So I think that's what you should look towards next year.
Thank you, Andrew. Another question from Kellen. I haven't read this article, so I don't know what it is about. But if someone on the panel has read it, it would be interesting to get the answer. Is that recent Wall Street Journal shitty article on Russian improvements in drones accurate?
Well, I haven't read it because there's a paywall, but I've read some summaries of it from other news outlets who read it. And the general statement is that Russia has, it's mostly about the new Rubicon unit, this new drone unit. They're saying that they're more competent, that they have in certain key areas on the front line, like superiority in number of drones. And this is kind of starting to put Ukrainian drone operators on the back foot compared to last year, when it was more clear that the Ukrainians were more tactically advanced with their drones.
So basically, welcome to last year's news from exactly 1 year ago.
Yeah, because Rubicon in particular has really lost their edge. They're like, I would not classify them as a top tier in Russia anymore.
This is what happened basically just as the Kursk invasion started. The Rubicon elements had been deployed a little bit before, but that's where their first big deployment happened. They were supposed to go to Pokrovsk, but they were sent to Kursk to deal with the invasion there. Rubicon is in many ways obviously made of more competent people than most of the other drone units in Russia, but it's a lot of copying of Ukrainian tactics. And the technology is obviously important, but from my perspective, the tactics is the most important key in their success, so to say. The fact that you can fly a drone longer, more reliable with fiber optics is obviously a big thing, but if you don't deploy them efficiently, that doesn't make a big difference. So, Andrew, we saw how they used Ukrainian tactics a year ago with big success, and I think it's much more a copy paste and than anything else.
Last year, the tactics that they were using in Kursk were, I think some of them were things that I had never seen before. They were hitting vehicles. Like, what they were doing is they're taking like 8 to 10 drones and attacking a column of vehicles like simultaneously. Like all 10 drones would hit within a second, and they would take out like 3 or 4 vehicles in that column instantly. And that was something that was really kind of terrifying to see, because it's just, there's nothing you can do about it. It's just, you're driving down a road and then all of the vehicles explode, and that's it. The whole column's gone. And they were doing that like over and over again. And they were doing it to every vehicle you could name. Bradleys, they were doing it to tanks, MRAPs, everything, every single vehicle, destroying it in that manner. They were sitting really sophisticated ambushes. They were doing a lot of things that required huge amounts of skill and planning and expertise. It was like real soldiering type stuff. Like you couldn't do that stuff unless you're a real professional. Whereas now, the footage that they're putting out, and I like, they might be hiding some of their best stuff still, and I wouldn't doubt it actually. But the footage that they're putting out now is so mundane and so like uninspired. It's just like a drone flies, it sees a target and flies straight into it, and that's it. Like, they're not doing these sophisticated ambushes. They're not doing these like highly coordinated attacks where they're hitting multiple targets simultaneously from different angles. Like, I don't see that anymore. In my mind, they have significantly lost their edge. They've become more of just a generic drone people. They've expanded out to using more and more types of drones. At first, they were just using just basic standard FPV drones. They weren't fiber optic. I think they had like better signals probably. They could apparently were longer range and probably more stable in their communications than normal drones. But by and large, they were just basic drones. And now they're using every single type of drone. They're using Vandal drones. They're using fiber optic drones. They have Molnias. They even have UGVs now. They're using every single type of drone, and they're not particularly good at any of them. None of them are particularly inspired in the way that they use them. They're just a completely standard drone unit, and they just publish more footage. Russia has better drone units than what I see out of Rubicon, and unless they're just hiding all their best stuff, like it could be that they just don't want to share their best stuff. Then it's on them. But what they're publishing, I'm not impressed.
So when we look at Pokrovsk and the so-called blow to the Ukrainian logistics there, a lot of people are only seeing the Ukrainian struggles there. But if you go and observe what the Ukrainians have been doing in the Russian rear for more than a year in the same area and also other places, it's not much different. So that was my main comment about them copying a lot of the Ukrainian success. Obviously, there's Andrew made really important comments about their tactics. I think it could be more related to what they have available, and that then they may be stretched out much more now than they were in Kursk. It was a very pinpoint focused effort, but now they may be stretched out. What do you think about that, Andrew?
Yeah, they're definitely okay. So Rubicon has always had like 3 groupings. They had one grouping that was in Kursk. They had one grouping that was in like Sumy, and then, or whatever. They had the one group up there, and then one group that was in the south. And that southern grouping was always completely different than the northern grouping. They focused on artillery systems primarily. They took out a lot of like Bogdanas. They took out like things like that, like artillery pieces. Also MRAPs and occasionally tanks. But they operated in a very different way. Like, they were not trying to shut down roads. They weren't trying to create these choke points. They were just they were flying like deep out, like very long distances, and hitting targets very far away. So that was kind of like their behavior. And Ukraine has some units like that too. So it's like these like super long range guys, and they were probably supplementing other drone units that didn't have the technology to fly that far. They were like, every unit has their own capabilities. So so those two units were always very different. And I believe they also had some other guys near Pokrovsk. I think I can't remember, to be honest, back that far. But they always had like 3 groups, and now they still have like 3 groups. Although now there's like rumors that there's like a 4th group now, because they say that there's like a 4th group in like Kherson, but we've never seen footage of it. But anyways, but yeah, we still have one group in Sumy that's doing more of these like longer range attacks where they aren't like hitting one spot. They're not like shutting down one highway. They're more of flying out and hitting targets a little bit further away. Like logistics, they're deeper out. And then in Pokrovsk, they have the guys who used to be in Kursk were shifted there, and they're more like trying to shut down individual roads, and also they have all these like Molnia pilots who just blow up every house. Like they just fly Molnias like basically down a street and just blow up one house and then blow up the next one and the next one and the next one. And I think people are thinking these are airstrikes too, because you see a lot of people talking about how like, oh wow, this whole town got destroyed, this whole airstrikes. I don't think it is airstrike. I think it's like Molnias, to be honest. But yeah, Rubicon is multiple groups. Each group is different. They have their own personality, their own tactics, their own weapons that they're using. And they've always been that way, and they probably always will be that way. And I don't know what else to say.
Can we explain briefly what the Molnia drone is? Because I think that's quite relevant.
A Molnia is a fixed wing drone. It has 2 propellers. It's fixed wing. It has a range of like 40 kilometers or something like that, 50, maybe 60. Depends on the warhead. And the warhead can range from like 3 or 4 kilograms up to like 10 kilograms. And you often see them putting, it can carry 2 warheads, and each warhead is like basically like a soda bottle. You could think of it like that. Like a 2-liter bottle, you know. And you can fit 2 of them in the nose of the thing. So often you might see them put like an incendiary bomb as one warhead, and the other warhead would just be like a bottle of gasoline or something. Or sometimes they'll put 2 high explosive warheads, or 1 high explosive and 1 incendiary. They like kind of mix it up for fun. Or sometimes they put like an anti-tank mine in the nose, and those are like 7.5 kilogram bombs. So you can kind of put anything you want in ammonia as long as it's like under 10 kilograms. They also use them for remote resupply. So you like fill them full of like candy bars and fly them at people, things like that.
They're quite rudimentary drones. They're very cheap, and it's a mass weapon more than a precision high-end drone.
Yeah.
But I think they've improved the radio communication quite a bit.
Yeah, there's all sorts of Molnias. There are fiber optic Molnias. They're extraordinarily rare, but they exist. There are Molnias can be used. They can attack vehicles. They can attack buildings. They're usually attacking buildings or dugouts, but they can attack vehicles. We see them attack infantry, like they will use a Mavic to push infantry into a hideout, and depending on what sort of hideout it is, they'll fly ammonia into it. Like one thing we see a lot is if people like hide in a bush or some sort of foliage, they often fly ammonia into the foliage. They like doing that. I've also seen them fly them into basements and all sorts of things. They can be agile. It depends a lot on the skill of the pilot. A lot of pilots are not very skilled. And it is fixed wing, so you have to be like more graceful in how you're flying it, especially with bigger warheads. If you do quick movements of these big warheads, you can lose a lot of energy and lose altitude, and then you like kind of lose control because you don't have the speed to make up for the heaviness of the warhead. So they are rudimentary drones, though. They're basically made out of, it's like 2 pipes with wings, and that's pretty much, and 2 engines. So it could not be more simple.
Continue.
Also, Ukraine copied the Monia, and I can never remember what it's called. But
Dart.
no. They copied the Monia. It's literally 1-for-1 copy, but they don't call it ammonia. Monia means lightning in Russian, and they called it lightning in Ukrainian, and I can never remember the word for lightning, but that's what it's called.
Rim?
Well, it starts with a B, and it's really long, and I always forget.
They also have the Dart, which is similar, but
Yeah, the Dart's similar, but yeah, they 1-for-1 copied the Monia because it is a good drone, and it is different than a Dart. It's bigger than a Dart, and it carries a bigger warhead.
continuing with the questions that are about drones now. So, do you think Russian drones are easier to fly for the pilots? My answer is, I think no. But maybe Andrew has a different answer to that.
No, they're heavy. They're heavy drones. Then I think that the weight, it can be an advantage in depending on how you fly it. It can get through things easier because it's so heavy. But like there are Russian drones that are made of like steel and aluminum, whereas Ukraine is using like much lighter materials, carbon fiber and stuff like that. So I think that's really kind of the big difference. And also I think Ukraine probably does more to handle vibrations than the Russians do.
Someone that we know told me that the drone you talked about is called Blishkavka.
Yeah, that's what it's called.
Ozzy is asking if Rubicon lose many drone operators. Does Ukraine target them? Yeah, well, there's been a few stories about that, but I mean, it's hard to validate as well which drone team you took out. So
yeah, drone pilots are one of the highest priority targets. So if you identify one, you want to go after it. But the thing about Rubicon, and you have to keep in mind, Rubicon is made of lots of different small groups, and each group is different. So, but Rubicon has groups that basically focus, like their primary job is hunting down pilots. And so Rubicon has people who all they do all day, every day is hunt down Ukrainian pilots, and Ukraine has the same to hunt down Russian pilots. So it's a dangerous game. It's like this cat and mouse thing.
Yep. So one Grail is asking about warheads. Is there a fairly standard rate of weight to TNT equivalent used in the various drone warheads, or is it a range of various high explosives? There is a myriad of different munitions used by both sides. I would say that the Ukrainians have likely a lot more different types than the Russians, but the Russians also do use a lot of different warheads, different sizes, different for different applications, and also different kinds of munitions. Some with fragmentation, some with thermobaric, some incendiary munitions. You see a lot more of these explosions than me, Andrew, but
yeah, there's huge variation. I think the most common size we see is 750, but they come in like every size and shape. It's really incredible.
Also, like the amount of munitions dropped by drones is quite enormous, and you also see a very big variation in the warhead sizes and types of warhead used. a lot of drones are flying with small fragmentation warheads, but they can also carry fairly big warheads as well. So
And it's very common that a drone carries multiple types of warheads. So you might fit like one big one and one small one, for example.
yeah, nothing is standard, that's for sure. Yeah, I think that was all the drone questions. What do you think? The AFU is not prioritizing the south. I think the south is much more strategic than anywhere in Donetsk, from Kellen.
I agree. I don't know. I have no idea. I assume it's political, but I don't know. I would prioritize the South personally.
I think the person that has the answer to that question, only the people at the highest ranks in Ukrainian politics and the military can really answer that question. For me, I think everyone here as well, it's a big question mark why it's not being prioritized.
Or at least equal. It's like, it seems it has like zero priority. It's like, I don't get it.
Yeah. Hey, but they keep bombing in Kursk, Andrew.
Yeah, Tochnyi. They're going to have to rebuild Tochnyi when Ukraine's done with it.
Will it ever be rebuilt, though? So, I think we got through most of the questions. Joseph, did you see any more questions?
No, you did a great job. I really went through them all.
One thing I want to go back to was Kellen's question, because if your account, Joseph, of what the article states is correct, I feel like it's very similar to when the whole FPV drone reporting started. Everyone were, the Russians have more drones, Ukraine is lacking behind, kind of reporting, without actually going into the substance of what the differences are between the Ukrainian drone forces and the Russian drone forces.
Yeah, it seems pretty similar to me. I think the one thing I didn't really clearly mention was they said that at Pokrovsk, according to the armed forces of Ukraine, and they're quoting Rob Lee, we won't get into that, that the armed forces of Ukraine claim that there's the Russian drones in the area outnumber the Ukrainians 10-1. And, that's something also a soldier said, is that they're not beating us in tactics, but they're beating us in scale. So I don't know. Do you guys think there is a discrepancy in the scale of drones in certain localized areas like that? Is that kind of bearing out in the evidence, or what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it happens. It's ridiculous. Okay, so saying Russia has 10 times more is ridiculous.
Yeah, that's the impression I get. It's like what a military would say, like, "Oh my God, there's so many drones in the sky trying to kill us."
The thing is that you notice a lot more when they're shooting at you than when you're shooting at them. So like, that's kind of like the way it is. Like you notice your own problems a lot easier. You don't necessarily see what the other person's problem is. It's kind of like what is it, like the fundamental attribution error or whatever. So no, it's not. That's not what it's called. Anyway, whatever it's called. It happens all the time. It's just like it's the basic thing. Does one side have more? Probably. I don't know which side has more. It's really hard to gauge. The drones are doing different things in large part. They're like fundamentally, their drones operate differently. Ukraine has a more of a wider range of drones that they more regularly use. Russia's like mostly using Mavics and FPV drones. Ukraine has Nemesis, they have Vampires, they have like all of these other drones that are getting mixed in, and they are that's a lot of drone markers. So there's just, the drones are different, they're doing different things, they're operating in different areas for different purposes, and what a soldier might think of as being very important to him personally might not be important to whatever's going on above him that he doesn't understand what's happening. So it's hard to talk about. I don't know. There was a point where Ukraine definitely had a massive drone advantage in this area, and that advantage went away when they brought in Rubicon. And that was unfortunate. It would have been cool if Ukraine could have basically defeated Rubicon and not allowed them to set up, but that did not happen. And Rubicon did set up, and they started doing a lot of damage. So Ukraine's advantage disappeared in this area.
I just want to make a point that the drone operators are also entirely dependent on logistics working. And this is where I think Russia had the most success in this specific area. This is, by the way, Pokrovsk. You can't even see it. But from 1st of January until today, that's all the geolocated markings that has the keyword drone in it. We could go into more detail. There's a lot of drone interceptions that are blue, etc. But yeah, I think the larger effect has been the fact that Ukraine couldn't get logistics in, rather than the actual drone advantage per se. A lot of things went bad in the defense of Pokrovsk.
Yeah, it seems to me, again, I have no skin in this game. I'm not the one aggregating all the data, but from what I'm looking at it from the outside, like we've been down this road before. We've had media publications talk to Ukrainian military units who say we're outnumbered 10-1 by drones. But then, a lot of these guys like Andrew and others are doing empirical research that I think shows at most the drone situation is even. Previously, there was an advantage to Ukraine. So like, there was, Russia's ahead of where they were, but it's definitely not clear that Russia has gained any kind of like drone superiority or a drone advantage. And the thing is, they did this last time where our data said that, I shouldn't say our, but like Andrew's data said the drone, like the Russians and the Ukrainians have approximately an equal number of drones, more or less. And then we were told, no, that's wrong. We have access to all this secret data from the Ukrainians that the Russians are way out producing Ukraine. And then months later, those same people said, oh, no, actually, our new data came in and like, actually, we've concluded that it's about even. And it's like, we knew that already. You guys are just backtracking to where we were months ago. So, it seems to me like this is the same situation. We've got Ukrainian units saying there's 10 times as many Russian drones. They're not basing that on anything exact, but that gets repeated by a media publication, which then it becomes like a numerical fact. And then we get these claims of like Russian drone superiority. Again, I'm not suggesting that the situation is amazing for Ukraine. It does sound like Russia has gotten further ahead than where they were maybe last year or whatever. But to say that Russia has some 10-1 advantage or this drone superiority in the sky is definitely overblown. And it sounds like the WSJ is repeating a pattern that we've seen before.
Basically, in this area, on the Russian side, like every few meters is a destroyed vehicle. It's on every single road, basically, and that's their situation. Is you drive, you could drive down a block in one of these random towns and see on that block like a handful of destroyed armored pieces and half a dozen or a dozen Ladas or whatever destroyed and burned out. And then you take a turn and go down the next block and it's the same, and the next block is the same, and that's the way every single road here is. They're destroyed everywhere. And in the fields, more destroyed vehicles. Everywhere is destroyed. Okay, so and these logistics are just getting wiped out, and it's true on both sides. Nobody has any solution for how to deal with logistics at this with this amount of drone saturation, and the drones are getting longer and longer range. I don't know how much longer range they can get realistically. Right now, we're looking at trends with like 50-kilometer range. It becomes can you saturate 50 kilometers out? That I mean, obviously the area required goes up by a square, so you need the square how many drones you need to saturate that far out. So it gets harder and harder to further out. But right now, easily out to like 20 kilometers is saturated to the point where driving is very difficult and dangerous. And until someone has a solution, there's not much you can do. And we know what does not work. We know that EW is not good enough. We know that armor doesn't work. So there has to be some other solution. Netting helps a little tiny bit. It's not great, especially not if you only have one net. Maybe if you had like 3 or 4 nets, it would work better. Really, your best option is to go underground and be a mole person. And that's why I'm a mole person, because I've gone underground where it's safe.
I'm strongly contemplating becoming a mole person myself. Yeah, I think this is like the perfect visual data to just show it's a mess. Like, obviously, both sides are doing everything they can. It's pretty tit for tat when it comes to drones. Yeah.
Yeah, these are the published videos that are geolocated. The problem, the basement probably missed a few, but took most of the drone videos that were possible to geolocate in this area. There are also a lot of unpublished strikes. So we don't know exactly how much, but yeah, it's going to be a lot more. There's a lot of strikes here.
Frankly, if we had more time, like if we had like on any given day, we probably have 4 or 5 people geolocating, right? If we had 15 geolocating, we would probably geo 3 times as many things as we do. So there's a lot of even low-hanging fruit that we don't have time to geo in this area alone. And what you see there, you could probably triple it. And that's like more realistic.
Yep. And if you're interested, you can head on over to Tochnyi.info. We do have a link, an application to join the basement if you'd like to be part of this noble effort to document all this madness.
Yeah, if you want to look at highly pixelated video with very low detail and try to find where it is. Like, where is this random house in the middle of the city? It's got to be there somewhere.
Hey, not all of the videos are like that.
Well, a lot of them are.
If you join the basement, if you go to Tochnyi.info and join the basement, we promise we'll only give you the easy ones.
Oh, those are the easy ones. You know the hard ones. The hard ones are a guy is standing in grass. Good luck.
Okay. Well, yeah. I guess we'll close out here. Erlend, is that good?
Yeah.
Okay. So real quick, I did want to mention, as I said, if you could go to the illustrious website Tochnyi.info. I did want to mention to people that we, as I said earlier, we have a new article that was published by one of our contributors about the unsustainable cost of Russia's regional recruitment model, Judas Everett. Yeah, good guy. And we're going to have him on in the near future, I think, to talk about his article. So just very briefly, I would mention to people that the article is published. It's out. A lot of good detail about what's going on with Russian recruitment and how it all works. So I would highly advise and recommend people to go on over to Tochnyi.info, check out our articles. And yeah, there is a little join the basement link somewheres on there as well, up in the corner there. There it is. Yeah, right there. So yeah, those 2 things are great on the website. So I think that's it for our show this week. We do appreciate everyone tuning in. We appreciate. Oh, go ahead.
But there is a little update as well to the Human Safari map. So more data has been loaded in, and now it's actually taking a lot more time to load than I'm used to.
Yeah, the Human Safari guy's been hard at work, I know, getting the data more like organized and visualizable.
That was a fail, but we're gonna fix that. There's more data available, and it also shows some quite interesting things that happened in September, where the amounts of attacks in Kherson dropped. So just head to the statistics, and we know why, because and we actually wrote here now as well. Yep, we added the little note: the 17th and Motorized Rifle Division and parts of the 104th VDV were moved to fight in Pokrovsk, and that resulted in a drop in strikes, but didn't last. Already next month it went back up, so they either got replaced or more people got into the remaining units. I have to ask Gesh what happened precisely, but yeah.
There's rumor that Rubicon's there now, although we don't know what that means. It could just mean that some dudes who graduated from their Rubicon school of Rubiconing are there now.
Yeah. There's also an update in how the dots on the map display. So these are not precisely geolocated. They are based on reports, but the precision in the actual location for the attack is now a lot closer to reality, because we changed something in the way it triangulates, basically, and also randomizes where the dots are.
Yeah, it's a great interactive map. You can show them it's 3D, Erlend. Show them how you can look at that. That's so cool. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely worth checking out. Got a little bit of publicity on the media. We've gotten some interest from different media organizations that are looking at it. So check out the Human Safari project at Tochnyi. It's obviously something that's very important to us in terms of making sure that the media continues to cover it, because it's a really horrible thing that the Russians are doing, and it's very deliberate. And it's bad. Trying to not use words that YouTube won't like here, but what they're doing is real bad over there. Cool. So we're going to close out. Thanks to our illustrious panel. Thank you to Erlend for putting the whole show together. Thanks, Andrew, for stopping by. You know, you're welcome anytime. Thank you, as always, to Stanimir for giving his updates on the Russian economy. Thank you, chat, for all your great questions and contributions this week. We appreciated all your lively questions this week. It always helps us understand like what you guys want to know more about and things like that. So it's good that you guys are here to ask your questions. We appreciate it. Thanks everyone who is not able to make the live stream for watching after the fact. We know not everyone can be here on time. So thanks, and we'll see everybody next week. Slava Ukraini.
Heroям slava.
On behalf of the brave.